tip of the iceberg. Yes, record the record the meeting. Sorry, I forgot about that. It's a topic that we're going to hopefully come back to again and again. We're really only able to like get to the tip of the iceberg tonight because there's just so much to learn about it. But I'm hoping that this will jumpstart and kickstart any Shabbat practices that we can think about. My first question before we get started, because it's always the same question, what do we know about Shabbat already?
It's on Friday. Starts on Friday.
Starts on Friday, okay.
It's 25 hours long.
25 hours long, okay.
Or when 3 stars are in the sky, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
There's 3 meals, have wine, challah, light candles. Women light candles. I guess that's a question, right?
Yeah, it's an open question. Yeah, go ahead.
Theoretically, it's supposed to be a day of rest.
What theoretically? What's this theoretically?
I'm saying.
This is not a lab.
Please let me rephrase it. Thank you. Let me rephrase it. Okay. The intent of the Shabbat is where we take a day of rest. It's based on the creation, the theory, the concept of the creation. 6 days, the God worked and then took the 7th day off. And that's what we are supposed to follow up on. And the one thing it's interesting. There's a number, they say that we should refrain. A number over the years, the rabbis came up with the 39 deeds that we were not supposed to, the 39 activities we're not supposed to engage in. And, of course, they have to tailor it today towards a modern world. That was many decades, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So I find to totally take off that day from everything is one of the challenges for me anyway. I thought I'd share that.
So we'll definitely get into some of those ideas and questions and thoughts. Anybody else have any things that they think about when it comes to Shabbat? Things that they like, this is what you remember? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess when we started celebrating Shabbat maybe 6 weeks ago, but I like that it's a time to like connect with your family and refocus what's important after a busy week.
Sure, absolutely. So all of the above, yes, and more. And I'd like to explore some of that tonight and, get into thinking about where Shabbat comes from and how we place values onto thinking about Shabbat and what do we do with it within our family life, and how do we make Shabbat a regular part of our lives. So where are my notes here? There we go. So I'm going to give a couple of sources. I'll throw them into the chat just to make it the absolute easiest. And I can provide them to everybody when we're done. Who can read that for us in the chat?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Genesis. Whoops. Where'd it go? One sec. Okay, I'm sorry. One second. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Genesis. And the heaven and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work which he had made. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because that in it he rested from all his work which God has created had made.
So right away, and this is the beginning of the 2nd chapter of Genesis, right? This is the very beginning of the Torah. And we root this idea of Shabbat, of a day of rest, as a remembrance that God created and then ceased from creating, and therefore we take a day of rest. But to me, the fundamental, hold on one second and I'll get to you, Leslie, yeah. The the fundamentally important thing about looking at this text is to remind us that Shabbat is not about no work, right? Because there's a lot of work that we do on Shabbat that is totally acceptable in terms of work on Shabbat, right? It's not about saying we don't work on Shabbat. It's about saying that we refrain from acts of creation, right? That Shabbat becomes a day when we think about what we created during the rest of the week, and we take a step back from that creation and we refrain from creating so that one can appreciate the creation that we had done over the course of the rest of the past week, right? And it's a very important distinction. It's not about not working. It's about not creating, not engaging in certain creative acts, which we'll get to shortly. But really, that is much more the way in which we should root our thinking when it comes to Shabbat than about just saying we don't work. All right, Leslie, you had a question. Can't hear you yet. I don't know. We want to pop it into the chat while we get to our next piece. Done. Anybody else had questions for that? No? All right. So I want to pop into the chat now two other pieces here. Number 2 and number 3. And if you'll notice, they are very, very similar. And I don't know how many people have read the Bible regularly or from, in some way more than just a cursory reading. But the 10 Commandments actually shows up twice in the Torah, right? It shows up in Exodus and it shows up in Deuteronomy. People know this already, yeah? People have figured this out. There are differences within the texts from Exodus and from Deuteronomy, in the way in which the 10 Commandments are mentioned. The most obvious one says to remember the Sabbath day, and one says to observe the Sabbath day. In Hebrew, it's Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho, and the other one is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. And the rabbis, and we'll get into that in a section. Okay, that was my exact question. Is this was a completion of an act, and there's no completion with our work as humans. That distinction was everything. Excellent. Yes. Perfect. Leslie, you get the gold star of the day. So the first thing to notice about this in terms of the 10 Commandments is one says remember, one says observe. Has anybody ever been bothered by this before, the fact that there are differences in the 10 Commandments? Not really, huh? Well, it bothers the rabbis tremendously, right? Because God's word is supposed to be in some way perfect, and we don't know what to do with it when it's, when there's something that goes amiss. And so the rabbis, in this bit of creative interpretation, which is all that they do and what they do so well, go and point out that Shamor, right, to observe, right, refers to all of the, what I would refer to as the negative commandments of Shabbat, right? You can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do that, and you can't do that, and you can't do that. And Zachor refers to, right, positive commandments, things that we do specifically on Shabbat, right? And I like to reduce that, and I like to say that to me is one of the most fundamental things that one can do. Step 1, when it comes to thinking about a Shabbat practice for yourself, for your families, for your homes, is to always figure out something that you do on Shabbos, right? I say Shabbos and I say Shabbat interchangeably. It's the same word. Something that you do on Shabbat interchangeably, that you do on Shabbat deliberately, that you find this is what we do on Shabbat, and then you have to find something that you don't do on Shabbat, right? So always ask yourselves, what are some examples of things, without even necessarily saying that you do them in your own home, what are some things that you think of when you say, oh, this is something that we don't do on Shabbat?
Go to shopping, like no shopping.
Shopping, business, commerce.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No cleaning.
No cleaning. Well, yeah, I end up cleaning a lot on Shabbat, I can tell you. When you host a dinner with a dozen people and you got services the next morning and you got this, you that, and you got a lunch again, there's cleaning that happens on Shabbat. So we'll get into that. Anything else?
writing.
Writing is a very creative act, right? Because you're creating words, you're creating ideas. Sewing, excellent. Leslie's going to become our charades expert, right, through the whole JIY. Anything else?
No computer or cell phone use?
Electronics, yeah. So we'll get, yeah. We'll get into what that means and how that works. Anything else? No.
Well,
What
like
are some-
baking and stuff like that, that's creating. I guess that's supposed to
Baking.
be done earlier.
Yeah, so we don't cook or bake on Shabbat.
Can you
A
reheat?
lot of those things. What's that?
Can you reheat food?
So it's a big question, and we'll get into what that looks like and stuff. Yeah. So what are some of the things that we do on Shabbat that
Eat.
one would consider? What's that? Eat. Well, you eat every day, but eat special foods maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Challah,
else? Challah. Yeah.
Kiddush, wine.
Kiddush, wine. Yeah.
Light the candles.
Light the candles.
Sing songs.
Sing songs. Excellent.
Is that what she's saying?
Go to the opera. I think that's what she means. Yeah. Anything else?
You should try to be intimate with our spouses.
You should try. You should you don't
We
have to
should-
just
I'm
try.
sorry, we should- no,
You should-
I'm sorry. Thanks.
You should succeed, hopefully.
Study Torah.
Study Torah, sure. Yeah. So what we're pointing out is that there's a lot of things that one can do to make Shabbat special, not just in not doing things, but in doing things. Hi. The other thing that I find is very important about looking at Shabbat, looking at the Sabbath from the Ten Commandments, if you look, especially in the second one, which is a little bit more, and it's a bigger one, but you see that it's not just the work that you don't do, but it's not your children, not your son, not your daughter, not your servants, not your cattle, or the stranger that is within your gates, right? And the idea being that Shabbat is not a Shabbat for the elites, right? Shabbat is the great equalizer in that Shabbat becomes Shabbat for everybody, right? Shabbat is a moment when you have a responsibility to make sure that everybody is resting, that everybody has the opportunity to rest and rejuvenate, right, on this day, and to contemplate whatever else it is that they have done over that time. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that's, and right, not only that, but in the second telling of it, right, if you look at 15, it's directly connected not just to the act of creation, but it connects it that you were a servant and you didn't have time to rest. And because you got saved, because you left Egypt, because we left Egypt, then we deserve to rest. But that resting has to happen for everybody. As a result of recognizing that we didn't have time to rest, and therefore we should be able to allow others to rest as well. Yeah, you got it? All right. This is one of my favorite sources. And again, like I said, I will recopy these and we can put them into the, can create a, wait, what did I just do here? What's going on? Why isn't this copying? Let's do it in two parts, maybe. There we go. One and two. Who's ever seen this source before? Who knows who Abraham Joshua Heschel is? Ooh, okay. Who's going to read for us? Leslie's going to mime it all out for us, the entire source. Go ahead. Excellent.
Jewish ritual may be characterized as
Go higher. Start with the paragraph right before that.
Oh.
I put it into two chat bubbles.
got it. Judaism teaches us to be attached to holiness and time, to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of a year. The Sabbaths are our great cathedrals, and our Holy of Holies is a shrine that neither the Romans nor the Germans were able to burn, a shrine that even apostate cannot easily obliterate. The Day of Atonement, according to ancient rabbis, is not the observance of the Day of Atonement, but the day itself, essence of the day, which with man's repentance atones for the sins of man. Jewish ritual may be characterized as the art of significant forms in time, as architecture of time. Most of it observances the Sabbath, the new moon, the festivals, the sabbatical, and the jubilee year depend on a certain hour of the day or season of the year. It is, for example, the evening, morning, or afternoon that brings with it the call to prayer. The main theme of faith lie in the realm of time. We remember the day of the Exodus from Egypt, the day when Israel stood at Sinai, and our messianic hope is the expectation of a day of the end of days.
So Heschel, in essence, is saying that we don't build cathedrals in space, although we do. I mean, we have big synagogues, right, and all of that, but that's not the important thing, right? Other religions build cathedrals in space, and that becomes their thing. Our cathedrals exist in time, right? And that the biggest cathedral of them all, the biggest time that we have as sacred is the Shabbat. What I find remarkable about that, and that's unspoken, but is really very much there in that source, is that Shabbat comes and Shabbat is there, whether you're ready for it or not. And we'll get to that in the practicalities of how Shabbat works, right? When the sun sets, that's Shabbat, right? You didn't finish all your cooking. That's what you got. That's what you got. Somehow I always manage to make it in time. Somehow I always manage to slip in just enough time to get everything that I need to get done for Shabbat. But Shabbat starts at a certain point always, and Shabbat will end at a certain point always. It is related to the sun and the solar daily cycle. So it changes differently based on the time of the year. But when the sun sets, that's your time for Shabbat. And when the sun sets again, that's when your time is over, right? To 25 hours later. And that's a remarkable thing to be able to stop and think about. And again, the next major practical thing that I will say is that figure out, right, what that timing means for you and your families, and how you go into that, because, Shabbat is there for us, but only in a way that, like, we have to be able, right? If you say to yourself, right, oh, this week, I'm running late, I'm going to go a little bit later than the time that I normally take in Shabbat, right? Then, you're basically cutting off a wing, right, of this big building, because the building is the building. It stands on its own the way that it is, right? And it's not for you to go and say, okay, I don't have time this week, I'm going to cut it short. Because if you do that, then you're going to do that again and again and again and again. And so Heschel is sort of saying this stands complete as a unit, right? And I'm not saying that you have to do it from sunset to nightfall the next day, every week, 25 hours in order to do Shabbat. But if you say that Shabbat for us is this time to this time, and it is sacred time, figure out what that time is like and make it sacred for you and make it work. Because otherwise, if you're playing fast and loose with it, you're always going to end up playing fast and loose, and you're not going to feel that sense of sacredness of that time of the seventh day. All right. Okay. Just a couple more sources, and then we'll move into some ideas about what to do with these ideas. So this is a very quick, I'll just pop it in here, but it's a famous source by this guy. He was a secular Zionist in the early 20th century. There's a famous line in this paragraph that we should, be mindful of, because it rings so true, and really it takes a great writer to be able to say something like this, where he goes and says, right, that more than Israel has kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept Israel, right? The idea that it's not us keeping Shabbat on a weekly basis, right? The act of Shabbat, that Shabbat itself is what keeps Jews Jews throughout history. And the fact that we have always been keeping Shabbat as Shabbat is this like moment where we go and say like, oh, great, right? Achad Ha'am goes and says, this is the secret to longevity, is that you have this ritual for thousands of years that you stick with it, and it's, you make it work. And that is what kept us Jewish throughout history. Fascinating source. It's really like I said, the line itself is important, I think, and the idea is important. He's probably famous for a lot of other, cultural and ethical writings, but this really is one of the most famous things that he had said. Anyways, and okay. Here, this is really important. And this goes back to the source that we had spoken about before. And this is from this book, Thinking Shabbat. Again, it's going to go in two sources because we got to break it up. Who's heard the term Shomer Shabbat? Anybody's ever heard the term Shomer Shabbos before? I'm Shomer Shabbat. I'm Shomer Shabbos. Right? It even made a very famous appearance in a very famous film that involves bowling, right? There's
Big
children
Lebowski.
around. The Big Lebowski, exactly, right? What does he go and say? He says, I don't
Shomer
roll on
Shabbos.
Shabbos. I'm Shomer Shabbos. I don't roll on Shabbos, right? Classic line. Anyways, and Lawrence Kushner goes and says, right, and he's a liberal rabbi, he says, we need a way to describe what liberal Jews who are serious about Shabbat, right? Because Shomer Shabbat, right, is about, the ideal, but he says, right, that it's been appropriated and defined by someone else, meaning the Orthodox. The Orthodox go and say, I'm Shomer Shabbos, right? And if you don't fit into the Orthodox definition of what it means to be Shomer Shabbos, that's a problem. So what does he go and say? He says, remember we had that Shamor and that Zachor, and that the rabbi said one relates to the positive commandments and one relates to the negative commandments. So he wants to take that Shamor and he says, Shomer Shabbos, that's for them. We are going to be Zocher Shabbat. One who is Zocher Shabbat, and go in that last paragraph, would remember throughout the day's duration that it was Shabbat. Not so easy as it first sounds. We say to one another, do anything you want, as long as you will remember that it is Shabbat. And that will ensure that whatever you will do will be lichvod HaShabbat, for the honor of the Shabbat, right? And this goes to, if you ask me, the essence of starting to think about Shabbat as a regular weekly practice without necessarily saying you're going to do Shabbat in this very specific, very halachic, very orthodox approach to doing stuff. And by saying, well, we're going to do something, and that's something that we're going to commit to do, we actually want to commit to it, and we want to be serious about it. We want to be real about it, and we are going to focus on it, and we are going to do that and be serious about it the whole way. And to say, I have a friend who I know, he keeps, for example, it's hard for him. He says, it's so hard for me to do 25 hours, right? So I do 12-hour Shabbats, right? Because in Montreal, especially, the weekends are for skiing. And the whole weekend is for skiing. You need both days to ski. It's easier. You're going up north and you're going to go skiing, right? He says he's a big skiing kind of guy, and in the summer he's a big cyclist, right? He says, look, so Shabbat starts at 8 p.m. I'm going to go from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. and I'm going to be really focused on those 12 hours. And 8 a.m. I'm done, right? But that's his thing, right? And maybe another 12 hours he's going to add to that some sort of thinking about it. So like I say that, or I say, an Orthodox person would never tell you, go to a movie on Shabbat, because that's a Shabbat sort of thing to do. An Orthodox person will go and say, God forbid, you can't go to a movie on Shabbat. That's totally forbidden, right? But there are people who will go and say, one of my Shabbat activities, I love movies. I'm a big movie buff. I love going to the movies. And you know what? I'm going to save my movie going for Friday nights. And that's going to become a Shabbat activity for me. I'm not condoning that, and I'm not condemning it. I'm just pointing out that becomes your Shabbat activity. That becomes the thing that you do on Shabbat, right? And Lawrence Kushner is essentially saying, be conscious of that, focus on it, think about that being your like thing that you do, right? And then that becomes, I'm Zocher Shabbat. I'm not a Shomer Shabbos Jew, I'm a Zocher Shabbos Jew. And that's just as good, according to Lawrence Kushner. And I think that there's some value to that as you're, like I said, as you're navigating your way toward thinking about what Shabbat means for yourselves and for your families, is to say, whatever it is that we're going to do, it's better to take less on at first and commit to it in a very serious and meaningful and real way, and say, I'm committing to it and I'm not going to give this up and I'm really going to be real about it in this real way, and not to let go of it and to say, I'm Zocher Shabbos, right? And not to say, well, I'm going to do this for a few weeks, I'm going to do that for a few weeks, I'm going to do that for a few weeks. Commit to it, be focused, recognize what are the things that you're doing for Shabbat, and then be real. Oh, we got to wave. Yeah. All right. Gus, you're the man. All right. All right. And finally, I want to do one last little bit because it really speaks to the current way of thinking about Shabbat. Who's going to read this last source for us from Tablet Magazine from relatively recently? It only came out a couple of years ago, this article. Somebody? No, I'll read it.
I can read
Go ahead.
Powering Down by Jennifer Blair. Shabbat is like exercising. You avoid it, you groan about it, you think of a million other things you would rather do. Finally, you drag yourself to it and you feel amazing. You vow that you will keep doing it over and over again and become a whole new superhuman, super healthy, glowing you. You approach Oprah-ish levels of inner calm and rejuvenation. And you may just feel so present that you forget about your plugged in life altogether. It's a religious ritual that even an atheist can love.
Right. The idea that like you return to it and you return to it. And I can tell you that like, oh, we're going to commit to a Shabbat practice, but stuff's going to happen and it's not going to be perfect. And we got to think about that. And we got to be focused on saying, you know what, we will return to it and we'll figure it out. And we're going to go back to it. And you're going to miss a week or you're going to do something. But like that ability to think about it and to go back and forth is really going to be right. That is the current human condition. And we should be okay with that. So that's like the last source that I'm going to think about. I hope that these sources have given us like a good like way of thinking about Shabbat. And like I said, there are books and books and books and books about Shabbat. And I can give you a good reading list of books to think about Shabbat as well. And filled with practical tips and all sorts of stuff and thoughtfulness about Shabbat. And but you know, this is a good starting point to be able to think about Shabbat. Any thoughts or comments or ideas on all of these sources before we move on?
Yeah, I just want to tell you that I really appreciate the approach to that. There's a spectrum that, you know, you can celebrate Shabbats in lots of different ways. There's not necessarily a right or wrong until it works for you and your family. And you're going to see a lot of different people doing different things for Shabbat. And I just thought that really works for me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Anything else? No? All right. What do we do with this? Right? I want to tell you how I think about Shabbat, starting from like, say, Thursday night or Thursday-ish until like Saturday night, how I go through it and how, what are the pieces that I think that we can take away in terms of practicalities and ways of like thinking about what Shabbat looks like. So to me, first of all, like I said, the two main things that I think about in terms of values, I think about values of rest, right, of contemplation, and I think about values of family, of being able to like be with people. And family is extended family, it's community also. It becomes a moment when you're putting your screen down for myself, and you're going and finding those people IRL, as we say, in real life. Those of you who are not down with lingo from 20 years ago. All right, so like how do we deal with this, right? So, like I said, there's things that we do and there's things that we don't do. I start thinking about Shabbat. I mean, I'll be honest, we start thinking about Shabbat actually way earlier than just Wednesday or Thursday or Friday morning, simply because we're often hosting guests. It's been tough the past year and a half because we're still not in a place where we can host a lot of people for Shabbats around this country of ours. We're still limited to, we're limited to 20 people indoors and in private spaces. That's more than enough for a large Shabbat meal, but even that's only been a few months ago or something like that. So we slowly started getting back into, hosting people for Shabbat. But beforehand, we'd have like 10, 15 people just about every week. And the question becomes like, what does one do? How does one think about it? Where do you move your Shabbat? Where does it start from? So one of the divisions of labor that happened with my wife and I, simply because we weren't able to like keep track of everything, where like it was always better to have one person do the inviting and keep the calendar, because then we'd either end up with no guests or twice as many guests as we needed because we weren't keeping track of stuff. So my wife does inviting, and by Monday or Tuesday, I'll say like, are we having guests this week? Right. And there are guests that I want that I'll invite, or I'll tell them, speak to my wife and she'll, coordinate in terms of finding the right Shabbat to make it work. So, it's not like I don't get guests, but by Tuesday-ish, I have a good idea that we're having guests. We have about 10 people, 12 people. I'm looking in the freezer, what our stocks are, like literally like stock pot, like containers of stock for soup, but also like, do we have chicken? Do I have to go to Costco? Do I have to what do I have to get? And things like that. By Thursday-ish, I usually have a menu and by extension, a shopping list. By Friday morning, I'm starting to think about, right. Don't worry, we'll get to how to deal with hosting in a minute, Leslie. Right, by Friday morning, I'm already thinking about what my cooking plan is going to look like, because I want to know that within a reasonable amount of time before Shabbat starts, right, my meal is fully cooked and ready and done. So the first thing that happens is starting to recognize that Shabbat should be ready before the absolute last minute. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing that I would say is, when we think about what that dinner looks like, there are definitely dishes that I will only make for Shabbat, simply because, they're special. They're not a sheet pan meal. They're not, something whatever, and I'll do that. But then again, the absolute opposite is just as true. If you're used to cooking big meals and Friday night is the day that you just want to collapse and be exhausted, right, then you have to cut yourself a break and say, you know what, maybe Friday night is just roast chicken. It's just basic cooking. And I don't want to think about anything beyond that, right? But it should be something that is special. And then you have the two special things, right? We make kiddush on Shabbat. We bless wine or grape juice. And we have challah, we have bread. Somebody asked about why challah is braided. And that's really a product of just being, the challah that we eat is a European product, and that's what they made. They made these braided loaves. But there are definitely cultures that are Jewish that do not have braided loaves for Shabbat, but they do have two loaves on Shabbat. And two loaves, I think, is an important way to be thinking about, right? It's a good metaphor. It's a good lens for thinking about how we deal with Shabbat meals, simply because two is abundance, right? Most meals, you have a loaf of bread. If you have two loaves of bread, you're showing that this is actually something extra and something special, right? And it actually, the rabbis go one step further and point out that two loaves of bread relate to the fact that there was the manna during the week when they were in the desert, right? They got manna from heaven, right, in order to be able to eat. And the manna didn't come on Sabbath. So on Friday, they got a double portion. And so the challahs represent the double portion of manna on Shabbat. Right, so we have these rituals that we do at Friday night dinner, and we can get into more of those in a second, but I just want to take you through the rest of Shabbat. And the meal itself, right, should be fun. It should be convivial, but it should still, I try to like pull back a little bit with my kids and to get away from that crazy raucousness, right? That like we should feel like it is some sort of a special meal. The food, like I said, should be somewhat special. As long as I think in my mind you don't have absolute chaos, then you're in a good place for having a Shabbat meal. Unless that's your thing, right? If you're amongst, 10 adults and that's the way that you really want to have a great Shabbat, go for it. Have absolute chaos. Shabbat doesn't end with Friday night, like I said. I think that there are activities that one should save for Shabbat. There's this beautiful image, and I don't remember, like, it just stuck with me. Jonathan Safran Foer, who is a big American Jewish novelist, has a book, his most recent novel, and I can't remember what it's called, but he has this like family, and they're sort of like semi-observant. They have Friday night dinner every week, but they're always fighting. But then they have this ritual they've created, and he says that he talks about it within the novel, and he says we don't even know how this ritual got started, but it became this ritual that they do every single week in this house, and that after the Shabbat dinner, they walk the entire perimeter of the house. Right, so they'll walk around the walls, and then when you get to a doorway, you come through, and then you go around, and then they do that front to back, right? The whole house, the whole family walking front to back, like in a long chain, like a centipede or something. They walk through the whole house, and that becomes this ritual that they do, right, on Friday night. And I say that, like, you know what, you should be finding activities that are specific to your family, rituals that are specific to your family that indicate that this is what Shabbat is. That this means Shabbat for your family, whether it's activities, like I said, Friday night is the night that you always go for movies, or Saturday morning is the one that you always go for bagels at this place, and that becomes part of your Shabbat, or you go on hikes every Saturday, right? That becomes your thing. Figure out something that you do on Shabbat that becomes something that reminds you that this is something special for Shabbat. You do this ritual and you do this Shabbat sort of thing. So, that's there as well. And finding also just, who the people are, who are your Shabbat people. My kids have Shabbat friends. They're friends from the neighborhood that they play with. And finding those people that that may be around, and it may be all of us saying that we're going to start hanging out. I can't hang out with you guys on Shabbat, but people might start hanging out with Shabbat. So I think what Leslie's saying is about things that should be more strict. I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. I'm just saying, if people aren't doing anything anyways, right? This is more in the Rabbi Lawrence Kushner idea of Zocher Shabbat. I'm not here to judge for you and to say, don't do certain things. I'm here to say, think about a lot of the things that you do on Shabbat as a way of like getting into that. But anyways, as I was saying, having a Shabbat community is very important for us within our family and with a lot of friends that I know. And for our kids, it's important to have Shabbat friends that they hang out with and that they play with and they'll go for walks with. So think about who those Shabbat people are in your life. And it's just as important in my mind to do Havdalah, right? I don't know what Havdalah looks like for you. How many people have thought of Havdalah? Has anybody ever done Havdalah before? One, two, couple people, right? Havdalah is this beautiful ritual that has a lot of different ritual moments and pieces attached to it that signifies the end of Shabbat. And that line that we say in the Havdalah, where we say Hamavdil ben Kodesh lechol, right, the separation of the holy, the sacred and the profane, or the sacred and the secular, is our opportunity to go and say that here's our separation. This is the end of our sacredness, right, of our sacred time, and we go back into secular, into regular time. But what's amazing is that it pulls some of that sacredness out from Shabbat, and it sort of brings it into the rest of the week. And there's something really beautiful about having that. The same way that for me, Shabbat starts on a Thursday almost, and I don't feel like it's Shabbat. I'm still checking my phone, and I'm still doing this, and still doing that, and I'm still doing the other. I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm moving forward, right? I'm still feeling a little bit of that pull of Shabbat. Havdalah is this way in which we can ritualize the ability to like have the opposite direction. Take some of that Shabbat and bring it into the beginning of the week in that way. And the same way in which we ritualize the beginning of Havdalah, of Shabbat, with a glass of wine and with candles, right? We end Shabbat with a glass of wine and with a candle. Now, I speak about this, and hopefully maybe we'll have a chance to do some Havdalahs on Zoom all together on a Saturday night. Maybe not this Saturday night. I'll have to check what my schedule and what all our schedules are. But I would love to do some Shabbats together, some Havdalahs together. And what's amazing is that Shabbat candles start as 2 individual candles, right? 2 separate candles. And at Havdalah, you wanna raise up that Havdalah candle, Cindy, that we threw into the box there. It's a whole bunch of wicks that all come together, right? And Shabbat, we may start Shabbat separate. We may start Shabbat as individual people, but Shabbat brings us together in a community, and you feel that flame. You feel like almost like a torch. You feel that the strength of is much greater than the sum of its parts, right? The individuals are 2 Shabbat candles on Friday night, but we come together in this major flame, right, on Saturday night, and we feel so much more connected, right? So that to me is how we bracket Shabbat with the candles, and we bracket Shabbat with the wine just as much, right? Because we do everything sacred in Judaism on a glass of wine, and there's no difference to start Shabbat and to end Shabbat in that way. And then we add one extra thing, and I love this one because the rabbis give us this nice little interpretation about it. Sorry. Whoa. We have the spices that we smell that are fragrant, and those spices can be anything. It could be cinnamon, it could be cloves, it could be an etrog, right? You have your leftover etrog. Those things stay fragrant for like a good year, even after they dry out. If you happen to have an etrog lying around, any sort of number of things. Some people use nice teas. I have people use lavender. The Moroccans, I'm half Moroccan. The Moroccans have this custom of using dried rosebuds, which you can find in like Middle Eastern groceries a lot, that they use sometimes as spices, right? Becomes another spice, right? And the rabbis say that your soul, right? Because on Shabbat you have an extra soul, you have an extra point section to your soul, and that goes away at Saturday night. And so you have to give your soul that's left a little bit of spiritual food, and that's giving it some sort of something to smell, something beautiful to smell, right? And that's the significance of the Havdalah itself, of the spices themselves. And so what I tell people is, even if you're going to do a 12-hour Shabbat instead of a 24-hour Shabbat, think about when you're going to do Havdalah and how you're going to do it, and use that opportunity to bracket Shabbat, not just to say that we're beginning Shabbat, but we're also ending Shabbat in a meaningful way. And I think that that's just as important. So that's how I go through my Shabbat. But there's a lot of little things that we can do to make it easier, and think about our families in terms of Shabbat. Shabbat starts pretty late in the summer, for example, right? If I don't know, what's the latest that the sun sets in the summer in San Antonio? Anybody?
8:45 maybe.
8:45,
9,
9.
there's still
Yeah.
some-
So that means that 8:30 Shabbat is kind of late for a kid like Gus, right? Right? 2-year-olds aren't going to stay up till 8:45 or later, right? Just to light candles and have some grape juice and to have some challah or stuff like that. It's rough. So my wife started this thing called what she called mini Shabbat, right? Whatever the meal that the kid was doing, right? Friday evening, right? You got to feed your kid at 5, but Shabbat's only starting at 8:30, right? That kid gets grape juice and gets a mini challah and gets to even light a candle if they want or something like that, so that they feel they know what those rituals of Shabbat are, even if they're not going to participate in that. And you do mini Shabbat, you do it a little bit earlier, and you do that every week, so the kid knows as they grow up that that's just part of Shabbat, so that when they're ready for the Shabbat table, right, as they grow older, right, they'll remember, oh yes, we get grape juice, right? We get challah, we do this stuff on Shabbat, and they do it early enough, and they think about it in that way. The other advantage to doing that is that you then get to have adult Shabbat, Friday night dinner, without the kids around, right? And adult Shabbat can mean, any number of things, as Tony pointed out to us before. And that you get to have a moment. You get to have Shabbat by yourself. You get to have a peaceful moment Friday night without the kids. And then that could be just as important and just as valuable to our Shabbat experiences. And if that mini Shabbat is what facilitates it, and you don't have to keep the kids up at 8:45 till 9:30 or 10, that's great. Do that, and that's important. So even if you can't do the rituals at the right moment with your kids, find a time to do it with them earlier so that they can move in and move up and move beyond that. So that's the first thing that I would say, is to do that. Find the stuff that the kids love and serve it at Shabbat dinner, right? And even if it's something that's totally like not gourmet, like we tend to have meat a lot. Meat and dairy don't mix within our families and stuff. But like my kid loves mac and cheese. If I could like do a weekly Friday night where like she has mac and cheese Friday night, and that becomes like a special Friday night meal, as becomes mac and cheese, she would love that. You guys don't have this brand Wacky Mac in the States, do you? It's like a Canadian brand. Or you do have Wacky Mac? Have you seen this stuff, this box? It looks like Kraft dinner, like a Kraft mac and cheese, blue box, but it's in a red box. And it has different shaped pastas, and it works exactly like mac and cheese, like from Kraft mac and cheese. But it's this brand called Wacky Mac, and it's the kosher brand of like Kraft like style mac and cheese. And there's a global Wacky Mac shortage right now. And like these Jewish families are like going crazy. They're like, we don't know what to do. There's no Wacky Mac. Like there's somebody on Amazon selling the box like at $150 a box right now because it's like dynamic pricing. They're like, yeah, Wacky Mac. If that would be something that she would want to eat, great. I'm going to serve her Wacky Mac, because find the things that you can do to make that Shabbat meal special. Find conversation topics to make the Shabbat meal special. We always have a table topic, especially when we have guests, to introduce people and to have an icebreaker. And we ask questions and we have to answer in a certain amount of time. Otherwise, we don't get past the soup. My daughter makes a whole show of this, and like one of my daughters, and like, have moments planned of conversation around the Shabbat table, and make a decision around whether you're going to use electronics or you're not going to use electronics on Shabbat, or at the very least at the table. Right, and how you're going to do that, and what those things, but be conscious about it and make those types of decisions around that time, so that the kids know in advance, right, and that in advance that this becomes something that you do, and that's important. Notice that I haven't said anything at all so far about services, right? There's so much that you can deal with on Shabbat that you can do to make Shabbat special without even thinking about services. That being said, you might want to incorporate it into your life in some way or another, whether it's Zoom service, whether it's going to a real service, whether it's finding a congregation that you like that has a great Tot Shabbat program. And you say to yourself, like, we're going to go just for the Tot Shabbat. We don't need to go for the full service, but we do want to go for like the kids program, so that they feel like there's some songs and there's some Shabbat experience, and they get a little snack, and that they feel good about Shabbat also. And then you go off to do something else. Then you go to your bagels, or you do whatever you're going to do Saturday morning. But services can be a very valuable and important part of your Shabbat life. And you should figure out what that looks like within your own life and context and family and framework. Do not feel afraid, by the way. I want to go take a step back. Leslie, you were afraid about hosting. Don't be afraid. Hosting, and I can do an extra bonus, especially if we get on the WhatsApp. To be fair, I mean, this is a little cheating because I used to work professionally in kitchens, right? I can put a Shabbat meal on the table in under an hour. And I'm not talking about like ordering a pizza. It's, a main and 2 or 3 sides, and maybe a soup or something like that, or like at least 2 to 4 things that I can put on the table within an hour without thinking about it. And that's like part of it comes from practice, part of it comes from knowing some shortcuts, part of it comes from knowing that you don't always have to go crazy and be super fancy in order to have that. Don't be afraid to host guests, and don't be afraid to not have fancy china, right? Go ahead and just pull out, like, it's funny. My mother's Moroccan, and like, she's very, very formal and very strict and specific. God forbid that we should do anything that didn't like involve, especially on Shabbat, the fine china. and no plastic over the tablecloths, right? Real tablecloths, real china, real flatware, real glassware, the whole thing. And my wife's mom used to call disposables like the Royal Chinette stuff, she used to call that her Shabbat china, because she didn't want to have to cook clean after Friday night dinner. And so that became like her special thing. There was no dishwasher, right? She didn't want to use electricity. And so Friday nights and Saturday lunch became, disposables. And environmentally, it might be a massive disaster. We're not going to get into that, but you have to do what works for you. And I can assure you that whoever's coming over to your house is so glad and so touched that you are inviting them over, that whatever it is that you do is going to automatically be amazing and it's going to be a beautiful thing. So I wouldn't worry too much about messing up or not doing the right thing, as long as you hit those main selling points of what you're planning on doing, right? Of have some wine and have some challah and have a relatively halfway decent meal, or even say, you know what, I would love to have you guys over. I'm not much of a cook. I'm ordering takeout. I hope you don't mind. Right? That's just as fine. Cindy had something. Yes, go ahead, please.
Just real quick, I was in a PJ Library conference, and they were talking about, elevating anyway, one lady was saying that she had the same Shabbat meal, and that they just knew, she knew what to get at the store and what to get, and her daughter knew to cut the carrots and or whatever. It was something that everybody loved, and she just said that every week we have the same meal and it doesn't feel repetitive, and it's just so easy to not have to think about that. So I always thought that stuck with me.
If you can have Taco Tuesday, is Taco Tuesday just a thing in like non-taco places, or is Taco Tuesday a thing in like even places like Texas? Yeah. If you can have Taco Tuesday and every Tuesday in your house is tacos, or every Tuesday is Sloppy Joe's, Friday night becomes whatever it is that you're serving for Friday night dinner, that becomes fine, right? And the other thing, like, and you'd be surprised what it means to elevate and to have something like nice and special out of the mundane. There's a famous story of the Wendy's Friday night dinner that happened. It was like in Arizona in a retirement community, that there was like this retirement community that had a lot of Jewish seniors, and they just started going to Wendy's a lot Friday nights as like en masse from this retirement community. And Wendy's started putting out like candles and grape juice and challah for them. And they made like these stories about like Wendy's Shabbat, and like it got picked up by all the national services as like this thing. And they made that special. When I was a kid in school, and I went to a very, very religious school, and my teacher was going on about like this family that he knew that was really, really like was having a hard time making ends meet, and they were just so poor. And that one Friday night, the only food that they were able to afford was that they had a pizza for Friday night dinner. And for years, like I was like, oh my God, yeah, it was so like, oh my God, they didn't have chicken, they didn't have meat, they didn't have potatoes, they didn't have like their challah or whatever. And I was thinking to myself, and now I think to myself, oh my God, like pizza Shabbat would be awesome. Like I would love to have pizza Shabbat. So like, do you like make it work? But don't say to yourself that because I'm afraid I'm not going to do it. Whatever one does can be special. And I can tell you like right away, like, you know what, roast chicken takes 0 effort, like a whole roast chicken. And if you throw potatoes into the bottom of that pan to soak up all that schmaltz that's like dripping off of the chicken, you've got a main and a side right there. So all you got to do is make a vegetable dish, and you've got a main course, 2 side dishes in literally 15 minutes worth of effort. Forget about an hour, right? I can show you how to add a soup and something else onto that, and you could still be less than an hour and you'll be fine. Right. And we can talk about that, like I said, in the chat, and feel free, please do ask me for Shabbat cooking tips. But that for me is like a big deal to say, it's not such a big deal to do Shabbat, to do a Shabbat meal. I've been talking for a lot. You guys must have a lot of questions about a lot of the practical pieces with kids, without kids, any of this stuff that I've been saying, please throw them at me. Yeah.
I like the mini Shabbat because
Yeah.
like our son goes to bed by 7 p.m. So then we wait and do everything after. So it's, I just like that idea of doing a miniature.
Yeah. He'll know. How old is he now?
8 months. They do it at school. They celebrate Shabbat at like 11 a.m.
Yeah, but if you remind him that like this is we do this at home, and mom and dad do this after you go to sleep, and at 8 months they're not remembering much. There's not much cognitively going on there, but you can do that every Shabbat for a week, for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and they're going to start remembering that more often, and they're going to get to the point where they can't wait to like have Shabbat with the grown-ups, and you're going to miss out on those intimate Tony style Shabbat dinners. Right, because the kids are old enough, and you're going to hit this point, and this happens with my wife actually, because she's exhausted. Friday, like it's exhausting week for the life of a rabbi, right? So she'll tell me, it's like, okay, I'm going to sleep, you take care of the guests with dessert or whatever, because we're still having a whiskey and it's still going on, and the kids are awake, and she's like, no, I'm going to sleep, it's early Friday night for me, and I'm done, because she has to give a sermon the next day and this and that. And remember that, like in the winter, right? How early? I mean, again, you're a lot further south than us, and so there's less variance. What's the earliest that Shabbat gets in the winter with you guys? I'll get to the candles in just a second. Yeah. 5. Shabbat starts around 5. Yeah, so we have Shabbat. Shabbat starts as early as 4 with us. Like 10 to 4, we get a Shabbat in the winter. That's like the earliest Shabbat we get. It's then again, it ends at like 5 p.m. So very different. And when Shabbat ends at 5 p.m., like I say, you get to do the dishes, you get to watch the whole hockey game, and you can still go out at night, and it's not even 11 yet. But anyways, so when Shabbat starts at 5, right, he'll be able to be there. Your kid will be able to be there for the beginning of the meal. Then you can take a pause, put the kid to bed, and you have your meal together. But you've at least done the beginning, the kiddush and the wine and stuff like that all together, and then you're done. But the more in which you've ritualized these moments, and you've pointed out that these are things that we always do, whether you're with us or not, right? Mini Shabbat sort of serves to reinforce that. Any other questions before I get to Mary Ellen? No? Okay, let's get to Mary Ellen, and then I'm sure people will think about other stuff. Can you tell us about the candles? My son really wants to do candles, but he's also super high energy. Technically, we aren't supposed to have candles in our apartment. Whoa, we probably respect and honor that tradition. Do you never light candles at all because of the landlord, because of like your lease and stuff?
Yeah, like I mean, we're technically not supposed to. We did for Hanukkah last year, and I mean, like as long as we don't set anything on fire or set off the fire alarm, then probably no one would notice. But I don't know. It's just I'm a rule follower, and so it feels like conflicting rules. And then I don't want to mess anything up or start a fire or get in trouble, or not be respectful to the tradition. So,
so the idea behind candles started with the idea that, like, if you're not supposed to light fires on Friday night in your home or on Shabbat in your home, what does one do for Friday night? It's going to be dark, right? And so there's a group of Jews, they were known as the Karaites. They actually, or even before that, you have the Sadducees, right? And they really believed in the literalism of the Bible, and that said that we don't light fires on the Sabbath. That means that our homes are dark on Friday night. That means that our meals are cold, and that's it. And the rabbinites, the rabbis at the time, went and said, no, that's not what we believe. We believe that you're not supposed to light fires. So that doesn't mean that you can't have fires lit beforehand. And so they made it a regular practice to the point that you make a blessing on it. And it's one of the few things that you can make a blessing on, that one does make a blessing on as a commandment, like as a biblical commandment, for which there is no biblical source for it, right? It's a rabbinic commandment, basically, to light candles on Friday night so that one has illumination in the house on Shabbat. Right now, of course, we all have artificial illumination. We don't need those candles. But spiritually, I think it does a lot to sort of usher in this Shabbat to say, we have this light now. This light is not needed for the light that it gives us, but for the meaning that it gives us and the history that it gives us and it connects us. So I really do believe in candles as being an important ushering in of Shabbat. technically, historically, women were the ones that were always doing it, became a women's mitzvah. That doesn't mean, so for example, my wife is away. If my wife is away, which doesn't happen that often, but for example, this summer, she was away all summer. She went to camp for a month. I lit Shabbat candles in our home and she lit candles where she was staying in her bunk. The commandment of lighting Shabbat candles is on the place where one is and not on necessarily just on the family. So while technically the woman of the household lights Shabbat candles, there's no hard and fast rule about that. And in theory, anybody can and should and does whatever light candles in some meaningful way. So in that sense, so that's the spiritual piece of lighting Shabbat candles. And I highly encourage people to light Shabbat candles. From a practical Shabbat candle experience, if you have kids that are going to put your renter's insurance at risk, a very simple tip, and I remember seeing this in yeshiva, and I remember seeing this with as a tip that people say, what happens if you want to light Shabbat candles, but then you're leaving to go to somebody else's house and you don't want to leave candles unattended in your house, and what does one do? So the easiest thing that one can do is, especially if you're in the house, and we used to see this, like I said, in school, where when I was in yeshiva, when I was a younger student in religious school, and you had these boys that were lighting candles, but they were not supposed to, again, there was a fire safety issue in dorms about lighting candles. So what they would do is they would buy like a foil pan, and they would dump like a thin layer of sand into the pan, and then you would light your Shabbat candles in that. So then the event that the candles tipped over, they were tipping over into something that wasn't flammable, so that there was no way that can extend out beyond wherever it is that you're living, that it can't hit the drapes and it can't hit, the tablecloth or whatever it is. So there are definitely ways in which one can be safer. You don't necessarily even need that foil, the sand in the foil pan. If you have a big foil pan, that should be enough to insulate your candles if in the event that they fall over from actually lighting the rest of your house on fire. So that's a good Hanukkah tip also, and not just a Shabbat tip. So in that sense, that is where it's at. The idea that the custom of covering the eyes was interesting also. It was this idea that once you've lit the Shabbat candles, seeing the Shabbat candles is the thing that brings Shabbat in for you, right? And ushers in the Shabbat. Well, we want to make the blessing and then have the thing, right? Because you always it's the same way you make a blessing before you eat food, right? So how do you make a blessing before you eat food when it comes to lighting Shabbat candles? So you light them and you cover your eyes, so you're not benefiting, you're not seeing the candles. You make the blessing and then you uncover your eyes, and then the blessing is there. It's sort of like the food is there. Yeah, so that's where the idea of having those candles come from. The other thing about covering, yes, Cindy, go ahead.
Oh, just real quick. I used to visit for a while people in nursing homes, like Jewish
Mhm.
people. It was part of our
Yeah.
part of temple. And we would take those little
The electric tea lights, yeah.
electric candles, and I would light those. I don't know if that goes
Mhm.
against what you're kind of saying, but
Mm.
a nursing home, I think they had strict rules about that.
So yeah, so you should know that there is actually enough sources to definitely say that one can even potentially make a blessing on the electric candles if one has no other candles as an option. I had a hard time at some point recommending electric candles, only because the times I used to see electric candles were in hospitals where you can't have candles because of oxygen, or because you're in a ward where they even take away your shoelaces, if you know what I mean, because you're a danger to yourself, and things along those lines. And I always had negative associations with the electric candles because of where people tend to light electric candles on Shabbat. And it felt like kind of weird for me to tell somebody like, oh, you can be like the person in the nursing home, or you can be like the person in a psych ward, or in a place where there's a lot of oxygen because you're in an ICU or something like that. So in that sense, I always had a hard time with that, simply because of the association. But if you have no other way to light Shabbat candles other than with the electric tea lights or with electric candles, Like you can buy these little bulbs that look like flames and stuff like that. Absolutely. Or even just electric light bulbs, right? If you turn on it's the only thing that you have, you're in a hotel room and there's absolutely no way that you can light anything, as a candle in your hotel room. Absolutely. Turn on the lights, right, in a closet or something like that, and then make that your Shabbat candle experience. Do not feel like you can't do that. So Cindy, you're 100% right in that way. There's other things that came in the box that we have to explain, right? So because they're Shabbat related. So we have the Havdalah candle, which is really like, we're going to spend more time thinking about that and getting into that. But we have this wonderful PJ Library card that has all the Shabbat blessings in there. And then we have a challah cover. Who knows why we cover the challahs on Shabbat? I love this because it's both absurd and one of the most beautiful teachable moments that we can teach our children when we invite them to like color your own challah cover. Anybody know why we have a challah cover? Why challahs get covered at the Shabbat table?
So you don't eat it?
You don't need it. Sure. So, hey, Gus, you better color that Shabbat cover in very, very well. I expect to see a work of art on the chat coming up soon.
Yeah, I heard
So the
that.
bread wouldn't see the wine or be jealous. So the rabbis had this thing where they went and said, well, when you're making the blessing on the wine, right, the challah is sort of saying like, hey, why aren't you making a blessing on us, right? We're supposed to be making a blessing on us here, right? And there's this sense of like jealousy that goes on there. And it's great, it's absurd, right? To go and say that the bread is jealous because it's not its turn yet. And then we reveal it and say, now it's your turn. Everybody gets their moment and we cover it. My read of it always has been, and my way of thinking of it has always been much more along the lines of, well, let's think about how importantly the rabbis placed, how much importance the rabbis placed on making something not feel embarrassed, on to have like real, understanding of what shame is and whose turn it is, and to not take away somebody's honor, and to not make somebody feel bad because of the honor, even for inanimate objects, right? And that lesson can be extended to sort of say, think about how much we have to take care of other people in order to respect other people and their honor and their shame and their jealousy and things like that, and how we have to protect what that looks like. And so to me, it's not so much a lesson about the challah itself as much as a lesson on Shabbat when we're thinking about, when we are spending time with others, to ask ourselves, how do we make sure that everybody's honor is given the right amount of space and the right amount of time? So that's my thing about covering the challah, but covering the challah has become a near universal custom. And so that's why we threw in one of these really cute little things that your kids can go, or even yourselves, right? I see Leslie sitting there coloring the whole session right now. What is it? Is it the diamond art? What do you, come on, what does it look like? Oh, just filing her nails. Okay, I thought she was actually like making some sort of a paint by numbers or something, right? Whatever it is that like we want to do, so you should feel free. And this is like your starter one, and you'll know that there's like literally thousands of different designs and places that you can go find for challah covers, anywhere from Amazon to like fancy artisans that are doing beautiful things. There you go. That's a beautiful one. We have one actually, I'm not going to go and reach it right now, but it actually has our names on it. Somebody gave us as a wedding gift. They took the logo from our wedding and embroidered it onto a challah cover. I'll try to take a picture of it and put it in, throw it into the chat and stuff. But so that's it's a way to like have something in there. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're like way over time right now. But Shabbat, like I said, you can spend so much time talking about it. Are there any last questions before we really sign off, before we get back, before we meet again in a month? And that I can get onto now. Otherwise, we can just save it for the chat. And yes, Amy, I will definitely throw in tons of recipes, and less recipes as more as like tips and principles. Like I don't think of terms of recipes as much anymore. I can definitely help thinking about like cookbooks that I like, or ideas that I like, principles that I like. But tips for thinking about stuff definitely helps a lot in terms of I can definitely move much more in that direction, as opposed to like this recipe works for me or that recipe works for me. That's whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the candle. We've done top Havdalah at
Done.
temple, but we're excited to try it at home.
It makes a big flame, so be careful, Mary Ellen. It makes
Yeah,
a
but
big flame.
you're holding it and it's only up for like 2 minutes or stuff, and there you go.
Our
I
next
expect
oh.
I want to see in the chat everybody's Havdalah candle this Saturday night. And like I said, I do want to have, let's find a Saturday night when we can all do Havdalah together. On Zoom, we can just, or get on WhatsApp and figure it out. I think it would be wonderful to get everybody together, get all our candles going. Let's find a Saturday night that we can go and do that all together. Cindy, get over to the announcements.
November 15 is our
No.
next meeting, and we will be talking about Hanukkah.
More flames for you, Mary Ellen. Don't worry. It's all right. Well, we'll see you guys all around. Gus, come on, Gus, for the camera. See you later. We're all waving to Gus goodbye.
Bye, everyone. This was
He's like,
lovely.
what happened here? What happened? All right. Have a good one, everybody. See you guys soon.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Oh, Leslie's
Wow.
phone is still there. There we
There
go.
we go.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I learned so much. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was awesome.
And again, it's so much the tip of the iceberg, but like it's there's so much to do. Excellent. All right. I do hope that we can do even semi-regularly, that we can do Havdalahs just with the group. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be
let's
nice.
try let's try to schedule that.
There were 2 people missing. I'll go ahead and touch base with them and make
Yeah,
sure
we'll
they're
put it in the
coming.
chat. We'll figure it out. You have the video, and
Yeah, I'm gonna now I gotta
cut
figure
off
out
the
what-
video at this point because we were
Don't hit
it's just the two of us.